Good morning, everyone, and welcome along to this Fingal Chamber budget briefing event. Delighted you could join us as we look at the implications of Budget 2024 for business and have a discussion around what it means for businesses within the Chamber network, and also chat with one of our Fingal Chamber members about what those changes mean on the ground. We're delighted you could join us. For those of you who aren't members of Fingal Chamber, we're a business network based here in Fingal. We represent over 400 members in the locality, and we provide a number of services that you might have seen in the intro video. That's advocacy and representation of business, that's training and upskilling services, it's networking and connecting businesses, offering profile opportunities and promotion, and also doing an international trade service as well for those looking to export. We're delighted you could join us and hope that you're able to take some great insights away from our discussion here today. Today wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for our sponsors. That's McInerney Saunders. They've got over 40 staff and are in business over 3 decades. They provide accountancy, taxation, and business advice to Irish and international companies. And we're delighted to be partnering with them on this event once again here today. And first of all, I'd like to bring in John Fitzgerald, who's tax partner at McInerney Saunders, who's going to break down the major announcements from the budget and maybe touch on a little bit of what that impact might be on business and workers. John, welcome to the call.
Thanks, David. Thanks very much for having us again. It's amazing that the year has flown by since we were last here chatting about Budget 2023 and the announcement by Pascal. I think the budget announcement yesterday, or the measures announced yesterday by the new Minister for Finance, Michael McGrath, is the first Fianna Fáil budget announcement since Brian Lenihan of whenever that was, 2008, 2009. So things are moving forwards. It's the total package is 6.4 billion of the core package. I know they mentioned numbers of 14 billion. Last year was 11 billion. This year it's 6.4 billion. And that's kind of split 5-1 between spending and tax savings. And the tax saving package is about 1.1 billion. And that's broken down into, I suppose, a number of things that will impact on individuals. Standard rate band has increased to 2,000. Personal tax credits have increased by €100. So for personal income tax credit, PAYE credit, earned income credit, home care credit, they've all gone up by €100. So what that means for somebody is more money in their pocket essentially at the end of the year, which is always good. Very, very good. There's also a change to the universal social charge for those in the hit with 4.5%. That's reduced by 0.5% down to 4%. So those measures in total are really, really good, and puts more money back into people's pockets. The reduction in the USC also coincides with the increase in the minimum wage of 140. So again, like that, they're trying to put more money back into people's pockets through income tax measures by small adjustments to the tax bands and credits, which is good. And look, this is what are all the phrases that have been bandied about? Well signposted, kite flying over the last number of weeks. There's nothing in there that has been surprising, other than how much of a change is going to be made. So those are all positive changes, getting more into people's pockets, particularly in this high inflation period of time, that people now have more money, hopefully to take home, and hopefully to spend on other things, that they'll have a bit of flexibility around those things. I did note that Pascal Donoghue mentioned that there is going to be a change to PRSI from next year, a 0.1% increase. We don't know who this applies to. Is it at an individual level? Is it at an employer level? Is it at everything? Or what it applies to? What sources of income? Will it be employment income, self-employment income, or investment income, unearned income? And when it will apply? I think it's going to come in sometimes towards Q3 2024. And I think you mentioned that it's going to be the first stage of reform of PRSI. So I'm always kind of hesitant or nervous when I hear about first stage of reform. Is this a thin end of the wedge for a larger range of measures to be introduced on that side of things? I think it is partly to do with the increase in the in social insurance rate is partly to do with the aging population that we have, and the people retiring later in life. So it's to try and make provision for that. In terms of business, there's a couple of different things that have happened there. The core corporate tax rate has been maintained at 12.5%, which is great. But there are international measures coming into play, which will kick in from the 1st of January next year. And that's a minimum corporate tax rate of 15%. So that's something that we don't really have a choice on. We have to sign up to it. It's going to affect larger corporates, those multinationals that have more than 750 million. But it will probably impact on those smaller branches or those smaller businesses in Ireland that are part of a multinational group. So I know we deal with a lot of multinationals where it might just be the local office of a multinational and there might be 20 people employed and so on. But this extra corporate tax regime for them, this extra 2.5% is something that will add complexity to doing business here. It may cause concern as to how it's operated, how it'll impact. And there are other global measures which should hopefully simplify things as well, which is dividend income, and interest income. We have one of the most complex systems of tax deductibility for interest, and I'm hoping that there's going to be a simplification measure around that. Fingers crossed, anyway, so we don't have to do all these funny calculations. In terms of capital taxes, there's an announcement that there's going to be a review of the entrepreneurs relief. So the standard rate of capital gains tax in Ireland is 33%. There is a relief, or there is a reduced rate down to 10% where certain conditions have been met. So again, like the PRSI review, they're going to do a review of this entrepreneur relief, and again, a bit of nervousness around whether the rate will increase from 10% to upwards, or whether the lifetime threshold will be reduced, or whether there'll be additional measures or conditions required in order to satisfy that. Another piece that popped in, which is kind of coinciding with that entrepreneurs relief, is this: they're calling an angel investor relief, capital gains tax relief. This apparently is a targeted measure at angel investors who are putting some of their money, their capital, at risk in innovative startups. Relief is going to be for obviously qualifying investments in qualifying companies for a period of time, and it will again be a reduced rate of corporate tax. So as we said, it's currently 33%, the standard rate. This will be as low as 16% for certain angel investors in these risk startups. But there's going to be terms and conditions, and the devil will be in the detail. And sometimes with some of these reliefs, it's the workability of them. So they can apply to certain people, but the workability of it, it may limit the amount of people that it does apply to. In relation to capital taxes as well, they've amended, or they're going to amend, the capital gains tax rates for retirement relief. So we deal with a huge amount of family businesses that are looking at succession and passing on to their children, or selling their business. And one of the measures that was introduced a number of years ago was there's a cap at 66, and if you're transferring your family business to your children, the amount is capped at 3 million from the age of 66. So if you pass your family farm or your pub or your shop or whatever it is after the age of 66 to your children, this capital gains tax relief was capped at 3 million. Now, so they've extended that to the age of 70, obviously probably catering for more people staying involved in business for longer. And they've also increased the cap from 3 million up to 10 million. So that is a positive thing. I think previously they were trying to encourage parents or business owners to pass on their businesses younger, and nearly forcing them to pass it on when they're not ready to retire. And now at least this gives them another 4 or 5 years to help or to stay working. And again, I suppose that kind of coincides with the reform on PRSI and pension planning and so on. They also announced changes to research and development tax credit. And I'm just unsure about, I've always have been unsure about the availability of the research and development tax credit. It's great, they've increased it from 25% to 30%, but I'm not sure who avails of it or what qualifies, because it seems to be unworkable. It's one of those things that is very, very specialist and doesn't seem to be within the grasp of the smaller businesses, because of the amount of labor intensive and documentation and support that's required to actually get through a successful claim. And part of the rationale, my understanding is, for increasing the availability of the R&D credit is to coincide, or to partially compensate for the increase in the minimum corporate tax rate that I mentioned just a few moments ago. So that's going from 12.5% to 15%, and this R&D enhancement is almost like a compensation for some of those large multinational businesses operating in Ireland to stay here. So there's a few agri things in there as well. For farms, consanguinity relief, this kind of forms part of transferring businesses to, or transferring farming business and farming land, succession planning, that ordinarily the transfer of land will attract a high stamp duty rate at 7.5%, but this consanguinity relief reduces stamp duty on transfers of family farms to 1%. So that's great. There's also an enhancement to or an extension to the capital allowances regime for polluting efficient equipment and for energy efficient equipment on farms. Again, that's positive. Housing and property, there were a number of things announced, but some of it seemed to be tinkering around the edges of what was already there, such as the vacant home tax, the residential zone land tax, and the Help to Buy extension. There was an increase to the landlord, or to the rent tax credit of €250. So that was previously 500. It's increased to 750 now. And I suppose the one that people are getting vexed about is this landlord tax relief. It's 3,000 in year one, 4,000 in year two, 4,000 in year two, and 5,000 in year 3 and 4. So it's a 4-year at the standard rate. So that's 3,000 at the standard rate. It's like a credit. So it's not against 40% income. It's not a high against all income. It's at the standard rate of 20%. So let's say in 2024 it'll be 2025 it'll be €4,000. So that'll be a credit of €1,000 against your rent tax. Yeah, I'm not sure how that's going to operate, but I suppose that is, they had to do something to try and encourage landlords to stay in the market, to keep the stock of properties available for rent, because we do need, like, it's not all about having houses that everyone is going to own and occupy and purchase. There also needs to be a stock of property available for letting, for renting, for people who are, moving between jobs, staying in places temporarily, even for student accommodation, house sharing. So it is a way of encouraging the landlords to stay in the market. So we'll see what happens with that. Once again, when finance bill is announced next week, and obviously then the Finance Act will be published in due course and signed into law sometime in December. In relation to energy, a couple of small things there. 0% VAT rate on installation of solar panels for schools. They're retaining this 9% VAT rate. The 9% VAT rate on gas and electricity was due to return to 13.5%, and it's being maintained until October next year at 9%. So that's something small. And again, there's this small micro generation of electricity. So people who have their solar panels, or who have the wind generation at their domestic home and at their home, if they produce more than they need for their own personal requirements, they can sell it back into the grid. And 200 quid was exempt. Now that's increased to 400, which is great. In relation to other indirect taxes, I suppose there's a couple of measures that came in there, which happened last month, happened automatically. there was on the service industry or hospitality sector. That was at the reduced 9% rate, and unfortunately they didn't extend it any further. It kicked in from the 1st of September at 13.5%. So I think that was a missed opportunity again to review that and to see was there anything else they could do around that. And then there was one-off measures introduced to kind of curb or to assist with the inflation, the high inflation that we're experiencing at the moment. One of those was the energy credit. Last year it was €600, 3 payments of €200 each, direct against your bills. This year it's 450, 3 payments direct against the bills. There's also a number of one-off payments for those within the social welfare system or receiving core social welfare rates, such as increase back to school, extension of school meals, lunch meals, the extension of books. The school book scheme has been extended to, I think, it's first year and second year of second level schools. So those one-off measures are quite good. I suppose there's a lot of challenges that needed to be addressed in the budget, but on par, saying beforehand when we were chatting beforehand, on par, I think it's balanced. I don't think anybody's jumping up and down saying this is great, we've loads of extra money, or the Minister for Finance has listened to us from a business lobby group, or has listened to us from a housing agency, or from a homeless charity, or from anybody on the trade union side or the employer side. It's literally a case of something for everybody, and nothing that will upset either, hopefully, the economy going forwards, because we're still on that growth trajectory. We're one of only 2 countries in Europe, in the Eurozone, that is running surplus, the other being Cyprus. So everybody in Europe is envious of our financial position at the moment. And the creation of these 2 funds that he mentioned is going to be really positive, I think. So some people might say, and I mentioned earlier that Charlie McGreevy said, when I have it, I'll spend it. He's not taking that approach. He's putting some funds aside. He's not fueling or overly fueling the inflation that is likely to continue and to remain at this level for the next while. So we'll have to, I suppose, welcome the budget as it is, and see what the Finance Bill and the Finance Act brings with it, to see if there's any additional measures that weren't announced, which is sometimes the way these things happen.
Great, thanks so much for that, John. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to pop them in. There's a Q&A function in the bottom toolbar in Zoom that you'll be able to ask your questions, and we'll do our best to either get to them throughout this morning's event, or we will indeed be following up with a bit of I suppose a budget cheat sheet, or for want of a better term, that McInerney Saunders will provide, and we'll send that out post-event as well. John, just before I move on, if I can just ask you to maybe re-highlight or re-emphasize a couple of different areas that I know the Chamber Network, and Anthony might discuss this in a few moments, but just around housing and energy, what are the kind of particular headline changes and announcements that were made in those areas?
So I suppose the main issue with housing at the moment is supply. And there's a carrot and stick on the supply in the budget. And one is the vacant homes tax. That's the stick. If the property is not being used as a home, they've increased the vacant home tax from, I think it's from 3 times the LPT to 5 times the LPT. So that's one, to try and encourage homes that aren't being used, or properties that aren't being used as a residential home, to try and bring that stock back into use. The other one is this residential zoned land tax. So any land that is currently greenfields, that has zoning, that is ready to go, if it's not constructed on, there's a penalty tax attaching to that. So those are 2 things to try and 2 tax measures that they weren't announced yesterday, but they were enhanced yesterday, to try and encourage the stock of property, or the supply of property. Again, the landlord tax relief that I mentioned there, that's again another measure to try and encourage landlords to stay as landlords for 4 years. So to again increase the supply. The other thing that wasn't mentioned yesterday, but has been talked about, I think pre-summer, is the planning reform. So there's an awful lot of time taken to get from drawing up a set of plans to actually being approved to go ahead and build on land. So that reform, I think, is key. It's a non-budgetary item, but I think the reform of the planning system is key to increasing the supply of stock. And again, then on the other side of it, from the renter's perspective, so that's the landlord and the supply side. On the renter's perspective, or on the purchaser's perspective, there was an extension to the Help to Buy scheme, which is great. There's a lot of people using the Help to Buy scheme as part funding of their deposits for buying a house. There was an adjustment to the concrete products tax. So this is a tax that was brought in on concrete products, an additional levy to cater or to fund compensation for the micro redress scheme. So there was an adjustment to that for poured concrete. Again, in theory, that should have a knock-on effect on the cost of building properties. For individuals, again, there's the rent tax credit, increasing in the rent tax credit, which should, in theory, make it a little bit more affordable to find somewhere to live. And there's this other piece that I didn't mention the last time, which is the mortgage interest relief. It's a one-off measure. Not sure what it's what it's going to do, but it was announced anyway as a way of helping and assisting those with mortgages who have suffered a big increase in their interest rates over the last number of years, to avail of an extra 1,250. Capped at that amount. So it applies to people who have mortgages over 80,000. So that should hopefully help with funding mortgage repayments and easing the burden of the higher interest rates that is currently being experienced, because the outlook is that interest rates will remain at this level for the foreseeable, and are not likely to reduce. But yeah, the key measures are the carrot and the stick. The stick in relation to additional taxes for not using land, for not renting land, for not renting properties. If you're selling up on that landlord tax relief, if you sell the property within the 4-year period, there's a clawback of any of the relief granted. So it is an encouragement to keep it there and to keep it available for renting.
And lastly, John, just on energy specifically, I know you mentioned around schools and also being able to sell back energy into the grid. Is there anything else there, or they're the main highlights?
It's the maintaining the reduced VAT rate on gas and electricity. That's going to be helpful. Like the standard, the rate of VAT on gas and electricity is 13.5%. But it's been at a reduced 9% rate for the last, I can't recall, maybe the last year, and it was due to expire. But they've extended it until the 31st of October next year. So that's pretty good. And then the one-off energy credit. So that's something that is positive. Again, helping everybody, every household in the country will get that €450 over 3 payments. So those two measures are quite positive from an energy perspective. The one thing, it's interesting looking at these things and even thinking about it over the past couple of weeks. There is one missed opportunity on the energy and the drive to carbon neutral, or the trying to make things more efficient. There is grants there for energy efficient equipment. There are increased capital allowances for the acquisition or upgrading of energy efficient equipment. But there's not really anything there for process efficiency. So if you change how you do things, or if you're investigating how you do things, there's no real relief available for process improvements, which could then have the knock-on effect of assisting with reduction of energy, reduce your carbon emissions, reduce your carbon footprint. So that's one missed piece, I think, is there. The other, there was another measure. I was just about to talk about commuting, that they should have probably brought in some, additional benefits to give employers for commuting using public transport, or cycling to work, or using more energy efficient vehicles, or carpooling, or whatever that might be. They did extend the VRT relief on and BIK relief on electric vehicles. So that's thankful. That measure had ceased on the 1st of January. Then they did a botch job and kind of extended it a little bit, and now they're extending it forwards again. So that's quite positive.
Great, John. Thanks for that very comprehensive summary of a very detailed budget, I guess, yesterday, albeit we're waiting for some more of the detail over the coming weeks for that, though, to be ironed out. But thanks so much for bringing us through that. I want to jump over and introduce Anthony Cooney, Chief Executive with Fingal Chamber, to get Anthony, first of all, to get your reaction to yesterday's budget announcements.
Sorry, it's I think it should be online now. Yeah, I suppose in overall terms, similar to John, there seems to be a bit for everybody in this budget. Certainly from the Chamber network point of view and the advocacy organisations around the country. Not everybody's overly happy, but nobody's actually storming the gates of Leinster House over the budget in this instance, because I think there's a bit for everybody. There's a couple of things that I suppose particularly relevant to Fingal. They do obviously affect other parts of the country, but if we just talk about us for a second here, and a lot of these are interlinked. One is the in relation to the 7 billion in funding for retrofitting and the 7 billion in funding for the Department of Housing. Whilst it's a big number, and I think, it's probably what the issue of the moment for us is the housing crisis. Everybody's aware of it. We're fortunate here that we have the Minister for Housing in our constituency in the Fingal region. I think it's an issue that's affecting everybody. A lot of people who've got a lot of employees are having to travel from further afield outside of Fingal, and with an additional cost of either buying a house here is now very expensive, or traveling a long distance to come in here. It has the capacity to make the local economy less competitive going forward, and that's an area of concern for us. And I think, one thing we have to sort of be mindful of, and we're working with the local authority on this, is the number of houses that are going to be provided over the next 5 to 7 years. The fact of the matter is the ESRI, in their research for this particular region, estimate there's going to be 70,000 more people in Fingal by 2030 than what there are today. We've got to cater for them, plus the people who are in the region who are trying to get a home anyway. So it's a particular crux here for us as a region. As an organisation, we're heavily involved with the local authority and the department in the provision of housing. And the provision of housing covers 3 different areas. It's social housing, there is affordable housing, and there's suitable housing. So people who have money to buy a house fit in the latter. People who need help to buy it, which are a lot of people. And then we need social housing. So there's the responsibility in lots of different people. But one thing that is very evident is that all of the housing, irrespective of type, that gets developed or built in Fingal will ultimately have to come through the local authority for planning. And, we're going to have to be very imaginative and progressive over the next number of years to get the number of houses built that we need built. We can have all the money in the world we want, but if we stonewall somebody in relation to planning, we're going to have to, on a major scale, we're going to have issues. So I think it's one of the issues of key concern for us as an organisation. Indeed, we've run surveys here, business sentiment surveys over the last couple of years. Our latest one will be released next week. And having reviewed the content of it in the last couple of days, housing again is probably the single biggest issue we have. It's jumping off everybody's page. All the employers are saying it to us. So it's causing problems. But the other issue we're having in relation to the region is infrastructure and an infrastructure deficit. If we've got 70,000 people coming into the region in the next 6-7 years, that's about a 20%, 25% increase on the numbers that are here already. We're going to need the infrastructure to cater for that, both the light rail service, heavy rail, rail to the airport, which is probably 35 or 40 years in the planning, I'm here today. We're based in Dublin Airport Central, and somewhere underneath Terminal 2, there's a train station, and but there's no rail to it, no rail line, and that's something we're going to have to deliver on. Not least of which is the Metro North. We'll also have to deliver on bus routes. For bus connects are very important. Again, this week, coming in on the survey. And I would ask anybody who's on this call, when you get the email to say, will you complete a survey for us, please do it, because we do advocate on the results of the survey and the results that you tell us. One thing is coming out is that from an infrastructure and transport point of view, we've got a deficit here in the bus service. We have some major employers in North County Dublin have grave difficulty getting their employees to and from work. It's a difficulty for them. We're engaging with them over the next couple of weeks to see what we can do. But back to the budget, I don't see where we've dealt with that in the budget. We've allocated money, and there's chunks of money in different places, and John, I'd be interested in your take. We've allocated lumps of money, but I don't think we've got from the National Transport Authority, whether we've got a plan for Fingal. We have a long-term plan with Bus Connects, but I'm not so sure. In relation to infrastructure, again, the concern is always we tend to promise these things and we don't deliver them. We have a long track record of promising things and not delivering. Take Metro North as an example. And I think we've got to be mindful of that. And if we're going to build these things, we need to build them. Yes, they're major projects, but we got to bring them in somewhere within budget and on time. You know, a lot of the private sector can do it. You know, so really we've got to change. I think we've got to change the mindset when it comes to the development of infrastructure for the country. So I just hope we can deliver on that. But essentially, from the Chamber of Commerce point of view and our members, not us, it's the membership. I think largely, the membership, nobody's going to be up in arms about the budget. I think a large proportion of the membership, and those who are not members, and we've engaged with both on the survey. You don't have to be a member to engage on the survey. I think a large proportion of the business community are relatively happy with what they've got. And I don't think the train is going to come off the tracks with the budget we've got.
And just speaking, Anthony, about the business environment, business conditions more broadly, rather than particularly the budget. Another area that I know has been has a lot of respondents replied to us and let us know that there's issues is around the availability of skills and talent, and issues with recruitment and retention. So in terms of workforce development, I know that Fingal Chamber SkillNet, our own training arm, is heavily involved there. Is there anything in that you can speak to as well?
Yeah, well, I think in relation to recruitment and retention of staff, you know, if you come back for a second to the infrastructure piece and housing, that's the recruitment and retention is, if somebody doesn't have a house to live in around here, can they afford, or do they have the wherewithal to travel from outside of the region to get to work here? That's the question they've got to answer. I'm not sure a lot of people can. So that creates an issue with recruitment and retention. The development of infrastructure for rail systems to get people mass transit. There's 330,000 people, give or take, here now in Fingal. So it's a lot of people, and we've got some relatively large urban centres, certainly for the island of Ireland, all centred up around, you know, this region here in Fingal. So I think they are definitely connected. We got to get the housing situation, infrastructure, the progress there much faster than what we have in the recent past, the long-term past. But coming back for a second onto training and upskilling, that's been a feature of what we've done here for the last number of years. And you know, it's been a huge help to a lot of companies who engage. A lot of people are on this call today engage with us on Fingal Chamber SkillNet. It's the state funded, part funded. We've trained almost just over 2,000 people, and we've trained almost 500 companies in the last year. So we've made great inroads, but there's 6,000 companies in Fingal that we estimate could engage with this program. Everything we've heard is that the workplace is changing, and people are going to have to upskill, retrain, reprogram to get them back into the workplace. People opted out because of COVID in the last number of years. And we ran a program here called Skills Connect to retrain somebody to get them back into the workforce. Plus, we ran the usual sort of upskilling while people were in work. But I think it's like a lot of it is training, upskilling. We have to have places for people to live. Now, I read an article a week or so ago. We have north of 100,000 properties in this country that are vacant. A stunning number. North of 100,000. So we don't have to build all the new houses. You know, we got to get these houses back into the marketplace. And I think we need to do something drastic. It's an emergency. We need to deal with it as such. And you know, we've got pressure coming on all points in the economy, in particular for housing, not least of which we have, you know, we've reached out a hand of friendship to the people in Ukraine, which is the right thing to do. And you know, what we're trying to do here is for this region is get the housing supply enhanced and get the infrastructure enhanced. And I think the training is available. It's here. You know, we can do it today. The other ones we got to get in motion pretty soon.
Great. Thanks so much for that contribution, Anthony. Lastly on the call today, by no means least, we want to go over to one of our member companies and ask them what these budget changes look like for them on the ground, and really to kind of have a look at the recent business conditions and their future outlook. And for that, I want to introduce Ian McGuinness from Roganstown Golf and Country Club. Ian, you're very welcome.
Thanks very much, David, for having me on, and very interesting, John and Anthony. Kind of asked me just to talk a little bit about the budget and how we're doing. We go through a budget every year. I really think that Minister for Finance goes out there and actually tries to please everybody, and you can't please everybody. So there's nobody going to the actual, it's a double-edged sword. If you try and please everybody, you actually please nobody. So I'm not sure that this has really done anything too drastic in either way. It's tinkered around the edges. There's not much further they could have gone. There are a few things that I might have actually liked to have seen. One thing is the 9% VAT rate. Like in our industry, like we're in the service industry, the 9% VAT rate on food and lodgings was a great help to us over the last number of years. We're quite a small margin business, 70 people working here. And they took it away, which basically added 4.5% to our costs and took it off our bottom line. It actually put us up to number 3 in Europe in terms of the lower VAT rate. So we're the 3rd highest VAT rate in Europe. In the budget yesterday, one thing they did bring in, which shocked me a little bit, was the increase in the minimum wage was quite so huge, like it's 12.5%, which will basically move us up to number 2 in Europe in terms of minimum wage, behind Luxembourg. But the interesting thing is Luxembourg's minimum wage will be higher than ours, but their VAT rate is 3%, whereas 13.5%. If you look at the others, which you're right behind us, you've got Germany, France, and Netherlands. They will be slightly behind us in minimum wage, but their VAT rates are between 7 and 9%. So we talk about trying to be competitive, but there's not all that joined up thinking about how to do it, because you can't beat a horse every which way. You actually have to, like to John's point about carrot and stick, there has to be a little bit of give somewhere. So from that perspective, you know, it was a little disappointing. On the other hand, you know, we can only deal with what's in front of us. So in the last couple of years, we've dealt with a lot of stuff. Like I think, and I've said it many times, I'll say it again, I think the government did a terrific job getting us through COVID. If it wasn't for the subsidies, they didn't all work very well. And that's a point I was talking to John earlier on. Some of the things that they introduced are very convoluted and difficult to deal with and very hard to manage. And really, it might be a better idea if whoever designs them would talk to somebody in business first to try and figure out how to structure something that's actually, you know, fit for purpose. Like I've been through quite a few of these where you actually go through all the paperwork, a lot of pain, and you get to the end game and discover, well, actually, I don't qualify. So like it might be better to that's just on a structural level. But if it wasn't for the subsidies and everything, there's a lot of business would have gone to the wall. Like basically, the reason we're in growth situation now is because of what our existing government did. And no matter what any of the opposition or anybody says about it, they've done a decent job in getting us from mayhem in 2008 to very solid economy now, with a stage where, you know, we can put cash away for rainy days. Now, If in my business, if I've cash, I pay my debts off. I wouldn't be putting it away for a rainy day, and I probably wouldn't be spending it like McCreevy would have done. But like, I think we're in a decent position. In terms of the things that have been hurting us over the last kind of 12 to 18 months, a lot of it's outside of our control. I think everybody's dealing with, huge energy costs. Like our energy costs in our business, we're running at about 4%, went up to 8%, which is pretty dramatic. But like I said, out of control. The war in Ukraine has pushed gas prices up. That's knock-on effects on electricity prices. Our VAT rate of 9% doesn't really hurt the business because we claimed that back on inputs. But energy costs are a big deal. Staff costs so the minimum wage going up is going to really hurt us quite a bit, because it's not just the minimum wage. It's, it has a knock-on effect across the board. A 12.5% increase in the minimum wage is probably going to have somewhere around a 7 to 8% increase in wage levels across the board, which is really going to hurt. And some of that stuff we can't pass on. Like our business, we've a very small net margin, because look, we're heavily invested in our property, and then I've 70 staff here. We've got to pay every week. So there's a lot of moving parts. The cost of all inputs, from like energy costs and staff costs, have knock-on effects on all of your supplies as well. So if I buy food or buy drink or buy whatever, everything goes up. So like we just have to manage the big numbers, and that's what we try to do all of the time. I might be disappointed with some things in the budget, but to be perfectly honest, it doesn't really make much difference to me. I just got to deal with what I've got in front of me. And I think all business is the same. There's no point in crying over spilt milk. The job's done now, so we just move on. I think our industry will probably make more demonstrations about things like, trying to get the 9% reinstated. May or may not happen. Probably not at this stage, because there's a lot of pressure outside of our industry, outside of government, not to let it happen. I think employers' PRSI was something that they could have definitely done something on. Like 11%, it's not something an employer or the man on the street doesn't actually see, the fact that on top of the wages, PAY, PRSI, USC that the employee pays and is collected by the employer, there's an 11.5% hit on top of that, for employers' PRSI, which is quite a big number. In terms of something that Anthony was saying about housing, yes, it's been difficult for us. Something we've not had to do before the last couple of years. We have to offer certain staff. We have to offer them actually staff accommodation because they can't find anything. Some of that is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like where we're based is we're in the countryside. So we're only 3 miles from Swords, although Swords has now got, well, it used to be 3 miles from Swords. I think it's about 1.5 miles now, because it's marching out to meet us. However, local authority have done a lot of development on villages, and they've jammed houses into Ballybuckle, and they jammed houses into Old Town and Garristown. And did they put an infrastructure in to try and deal with them? No, just thousands more cars on the road. We nearly need to, in places like Holland, when they're planning their development, they actually look at things like, we'll build the infrastructure, we'll build the train lines, we'll make sure that we have, we have infrastructure to everywhere, and then we build the houses around it. Well, we kind of worry about building the houses first. There's also, we have a kind of an inherently Irish issue. I think it must go back to the famine. We all want to own their own home. Like I lived in Germany for many years. Nobody owns their homes in Germany. Actually, the interesting thing in Germany is you work all your life, you rent an apartment. When you get close to retirement, you buy a home with a 99-year mortgage, and you leave it to your kids. So they get a 99-year mortgage in their inheritance. So, other countries don't have this fixation on must own their own home. We're actually pushing that further, because now to be a landlord is actually got pretty negative connotations in this country, which I think is a little bit sad. Because, and I think if what's come out is the large companies who are basically professional landlords, fine, they're companies. The small guy, and there's a lot of them about, have a property, maybe by accident, bought somewhere and then moved on, didn't sell it, and are renting it out. If they actually rent it out to pay the costs and make a little bit, and that's a natural thing to do. They shouldn't be vilified for it. In terms of government support, the 250 million is an interesting thing that I'll be looking at. Is that our costs are going up across the board, energy being a big driver and staff costs, of course. But this 250 million support, there's no detail around it. I was talking to John earlier on about it, and he said that it's going to be probably based on your rates bill. And they'll say it'll be for small businesses, and if your rates bill is 10 grand or below, if it's 10 grand or below, well, we won't qualify anyway. I pay an awful lot more local authority rates than 10,000, and I employ an awful lot more people than maybe the 2 or 3 that would be in a 10,000 rates kind of bracket. So I'm not sure how beneficial that's going to be in the broader sense. But yeah, back to my original point, I think like all small business owners, we struggle to keep going. I myself have not had a 12.5% increase in my wages ever. So you struggle to keep going, you struggle to pay your bills, and we'll manage it. We'll try as much as possible to keep our prices at a competitive level. It's becoming more difficult because I think inherently our economy is becoming a little bit less competitive compared to others. So yeah, that's about it.
Great, thanks so much for that, Ian. Ian, just before we let you go, where can people go to find out a little bit more about Roganstown?
Well, our website's www.roganstown.com. For those who don't know us, it's a hotel with 52 bedrooms with function room and conference facilities. We also have a full gym, 2 golf courses, and we're 5 miles from Dublin Airport, about 3 miles from the centre of Swords. A little bit of heaven in the countryside. It's nice to work here. We have noticed actually, that's another point, because we don't actually have a bus route. So one thing that we're doing, there's the bike to work scheme, which is great, but some people don't like riding bicycles. And then some people, and we've started to do our own bike to work scheme for staff. So if they want scooters the big thing now. So we've quite a few staff arriving to work on scooters.
Great. Listen, thanks so much for your contribution this morning, Ian. Great to hear about your experiences and your input on yesterday's announcements and business more generally. Thanks so much to John Fitzgerald and Anthony Cooney for also joining us today and giving their reaction to the budget. If anyone has any questions they would like to follow up, us to follow up with, please send them into events@fingalchamber.ie and we'll do our best to come back to you with an informed response. As I mentioned earlier on, we will be sending out some information from McInerney Saunders, a bit of a budget breakdown post-event, and we'll also send out a link with this recording of this event afterwards if you'd like to share it with anyone else in your network to catch up with that. Thank you so much to everyone, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.